When you picture surviving a frontier winter, you picture the fight for heat, more firewood, a bigger stove, thicker walls. The image is always the same: a person feeding flames against the cold, burning faster than the cold can take. But the cold does not kill by overpowering the fire. It kills by stealing heat faster than any cabin can hold it. A stove burns an armload in 4 hours. The walls give the warmth back to the wind in 3. The math never closes. The fire always loses. One woman in the Black Hills understood that the answer was not producing more heat. It was finding the one place that refused to give its heat away. Late November, 1886. Birgit Brecka climbed down from a borrowed mare onto frozen mud and looked at what her dead husband had called a homestead. The cabin was 12 feet by 14. 3 walls stood. The fourth was half chinked with mud that had already cracked from frost, leaving gaps wide enough to fit a child's hand. The roof leaked at the north seam. A door made from split pine hung on leather hinges and did not close flush. Inside, the stove was cold, the floor was bare dirt, and there was nothing on the walls except a row of nails John had driven before the freight wagon killed him. Birgit set her 9-year-old sister Kari on the ground and handed her a sack of flour. Then she handed her another sack of flour, then a third. That was the food. $23 in coin sat folded inside a kerchief in Birgit's coat pocket. One milk cow stood tied to a post, already chewing at nothing. The mare belonged to a man in Hot Springs who expected it back by Tuesday. 3 sacks of flour, 1 cow, $23, and a cabin that let the wind walk through it like an open hallway. Kari looked at the gaps in the wall, then looked at Birgit. She did not ask where John was. She already knew. Birgit had come to Dakota Territory because John Brecka filed a homestead claim 5 months earlier. 160 acres of grass and limestone south of the Black Hills, free under the law if you lived on it and improved it for 5 years. John had been a careful man. He had measured the timber, paced the creek, counted the fence posts he would need, and written it all in a ledger that Birgit now carried in the bottom of her trunk. He had not been careful enough on the Cheyenne Road. A wheel broke. The wagon tipped. The freight load crushed his chest against a rock near Battle Creek, and a deputy brought Birgit his watch and a receipt for $22 in hauling fees that would never be paid. The watch had stopped at 2 minutes past 4. Kari had held it to her ear and asked whether a stopped watch meant a man was still cold somewhere. Birgit had taken the watch back and put it in the trunk beside the ledger. Now she stood in the doorway of a cabin her husband had not finished and looked south toward a line of limestone cliffs that cut across the hills like the spine of something buried. The wind came from the northwest and hit the cabin broadside. She could feel it inside the walls without opening the door. She had 7 miles between here and the nearest store in Hot Springs. No close neighbor for daily help. The Homestead Act said she had to stay, improve the land, and hold on for 5 years. If she left now, Birgit lost the filing, lost the improvements John had already made, and walked away with $23, a 9-year-old, and nowhere to go. There was no passage money east, no family left in Norway willing to send for her. The claim was the only thing she owned that had a future attached to it. She could not leave, and she could not see how she could stay. The stove ate wood like it was angry. That first night, Birgit fed it an armload of split pine, and the cabin crawled toward something close to bearable. 4 hours later, the armload was ash, and the temperature inside had dropped back to the point where frost grew on the nail heads along the wall. Kari slept with both blankets and Birgit's coat. Birgit sat on the floor beside the stove and did the math. Her woodpile measured less than 2 cords. She had counted. 2 cords was a stack 4 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 16 feet long. It sounded like a lot until you understood what winter did to it. Aslak Moen arrived the next morning. Aslak was 58 years old, a cattleman and former freighter who had lived through enough Dakota winters to treat them like a personal enemy he had learned to respect. He had known John. He had not known John well enough to stop him from filing a claim this far from town, but he had known him well enough to feel an obligation to check on the widow. He brought a lantern even though it was midday because the cabin was dark enough to need one. He walked the property in silence for 10 minutes. He checked the walls, the roof seam, the stovepipe, the woodpile, the hay rack that stood empty, and the patch of frozen ground where John had started digging a root cellar and stopped at 18 inches. Then he came inside, set the lantern on the table, and spoke. "You have half a cabin," Aslak said. "The north wall will not hold past January. You have maybe 1.5 cords usable, after you throw out the green wood and the punky stuff on the bottom. You need 6 to 8 cords for a bad winter, more if the wind gets through, which it will." He looked at the hay rack through the door. "Your cow has nothing to eat after the grass goes. You have no root cellar. You have flour, and that is all I can see." Birgit said nothing. Aslak pulled his collar up. "I am not being cruel, Mrs. Brecka. I have seen cattle freeze standing up. I have seen men walk circles in a blizzard until their fingers turned the color of old meat. Winter does not care how determined a person is. You cannot outstubborn January." Birgit looked at the nail heads on the wall. Each one wore a tiny crown of frost. "How long does the flour last?" she asked. "For 2 people eating careful, maybe 8 weeks. You will be hungry before Christmas." "And the cow?" "If you can find hay or browse. If not, she will be dead by February, and you will eat her, which gets you another month." He paused. "You understand what I am telling you?" "I understand." "Then come to town. There are families who take boarders. You can work through winter and refile in spring. If I leave, I lose the claim. If you stay, you lose more than that." Birgit pulled Kari's bed 6 inches away from the north wall. She tightened the roof seam with a strip of rawhide cut from a harness strap. She did not answer Aslak's last sentence. He left. The lantern stayed on the table because he forgot it, or because he meant to leave it. Birgit did not know which. That night, the stove burned through another armload in 4 hours. Birgit lay on the floor with her palm against the dirt and counted the problems. Not enough wood, not enough food, not enough wall, not enough money, not enough time, and a 9-year-old girl sleeping 3 feet away who trusted her to solve all of it. She did not sleep. She listened to the wind testing the north wall and thought about Stone. 3 days later, Birgit carried a pail of milk to the spring seep near the limestone rim and saw something that changed the math. The seep ran from a crack in the rock face, a trickle of water that had not yet frozen because it came from deep enough underground to resist the surface cold. Birgit had been there twice before. Both times she had noticed the water. This time she noticed the snow. A narrow oval of bare ground surrounded a crack in the limestone about 2 feet above the seep. No snow, no frost. The crack was no wider than a man's fist, but the rock around it was dry while everything else wore a skin of ice. Birgit set down the pail. She pulled off one glove and held her hand near the crack. Air, moving outward, not warm the way a stove was warm, but warmer than the wind that cut across the ridge, warmer than the cabin, warmer than anything she had felt outdoors since arriving. She stood there with her bare hand in the breath of the rock and remembered her father. Petter Kavama had been a farmer in the Hardanger district of Norway, and he had understood stone the way some men understood horses, not from books, but from a lifetime of living beside it. When Birgit was 7, her father had taken her into the root cellar in August and pressed her palm flat against the wall. The stone was cool, almost cold. Then in January, he took her down again and pressed her hand to the same wall. The stone was warmer than the air above. "Stone keeps yesterday longer than wood," her father had said. He held a candle near a crack in the cellar wall and showed her the flame bending. Air moved through rock, not fast, not strong, but steady. The earth breathed. Birgit had filed that knowledge the way children file things they do not yet need. Now she needed it. She knelt beside the crack in the limestone rim and held a match near the opening. The flame leaned. She moved the match closer. The flame leaned harder, pointing away from the rock, outward, into the cold air. Something inside the stone was pushing warmth out. She pressed her cheek against the rock near the crack. She could hear water dripping somewhere deep, a sound that had no echo, which meant it was falling into open space. The stone was not warm, but the stone was not killing cold either, and the stone did not burn through an armload of wood every 4 hours. Birgit picked up the milk pail and walked back to the cabin. She did not mention the crack to Carrie. She did not mention it to anyone. But that night, while the stove ate through its fuel and frost rebuilt on the nail heads, she thought about what kind of space might sit behind a 15-inch opening in limestone, and whether a person could fit through it. Tolf Vangen found her 3 days later, crouched against the cliff face with a candle in one hand and a shaved willow stick in the other. Tolf was 62 years old, missing his left eye from a black powder accident in a Wisconsin lead mine, and carrying a canvas sack that clanked when he walked. He had prospected the Black Hills in the 70s when the gold fever was still hot, and he had stayed after the fever broke because he had nowhere else worth going. He lived in a dugout 4 miles north, survived on trapping and odd carpentry, and knew more about what lay under the Black Hills than most men knew about their own cellars. He watched Birgit for a full minute before she noticed him. He was holding the candle at the entrance of a crack in the limestone, a different one from the seep crack, wider, running vertically through a shelf of gray rock, and watching the flame. "Candle test," Tolf said. Birgit spun around. The candle went out. "That is a candle test," Tolf repeated. He did not smile. His one good eye was the color of creek water in November. "You are checking the air." "I'm checking whether it moves." "It moves. I can see it from here. The question is whether it moves because the hole leads somewhere or because the wind is playing tricks on you." He set his sack down. "Which cracks have you tested?" Birgit hesitated. Then she showed him. The seep crack, which was too narrow for anything but air. A horizontal split 20 yards east that breathed but pointed downward into wet darkness. And this one Schwei, a vertical opening in the limestone shelf, roughly 15 inches at the narrowest, with dry dust on the lip and a faint sound of hollow space behind it. Tolf examined each one. He did not hurry. At the vertical crack he held his own candle. Short, fat, miner's tallow, and watched the flame for 30 seconds. Then he wet his finger and held it at the opening. Then he knocked on the rock with his knuckle, once low, once high. "The sound changes," he said. "Higher up the rock thins. That means there is space behind it. Could be 2 feet a pocket. Could be a room." He looked at Birgit. "You want to go through?" "I want to know what is on the other side." "Everyone does. That is how people die in rock." He turned and picked up his sack. "Come back tomorrow at first light. Bring 2 candles, 20 feet of string, and wear something that will not catch on an edge. I will show you how to test without getting buried." He walked away. No introduction, no name exchanged, no pleasantries. Birgit was there at first light. Tolf's first lesson came before they touched the rock. He squatted on the frozen ground, drew a line in the dirt with his finger, and talked about air. "A cave breathes because the pressure inside and the pressure outside are not the same," he said. "When the weather changes, air moves. In, out, in, out. Wind cave down south, you can hear it howling through a hole no bigger than a bucket. Miners used to think it was spirits. It was pressure." He held up the candle. "Flame steady means the air is tolerable. Flame guttering low means the air is bad. Dead air, no oxygen, or gas pooling at the floor. Flame dying, you retreat. No arguments, no second guesses. You retreat." Second lesson, string. He tied one end to a rock outside the entrance and held the spool. You tie off before you turn. Darkness does not care which way you came in. Without string, you are guessing, and guessing in rock kills faster than cold. Third lesson, the body. A 15-inch crack does not care about your shoulders. It cares about your ribs. He turned sideways and demonstrated. One arm high, one arm low. Turn the hip first, not the shoulder. And before you push through the tight spot, exhale. Empty your lungs. Your rib cage shrinks by an inch, maybe more. That inch is the difference between sliding through and getting pinned. He looked at her. Panic kills in tight stone. If you feel the rock grab you, stop. Do not fight it. Count your heartbeats. Get to 12. Then move. Birgit practiced the turn against a wider crack, then a narrower one. Tolef corrected her twice. She scraped skin off her forearm on the second try. He did not apologize for the rock. He told her to wear tighter sleeves. They did not enter the fissure that day. Tolef said the first rule of going underground was restraint. You measured what you could see before you trusted what you could not. They would come back. Martha Hildreth caught Birgit the next afternoon, measuring the vertical crack with a willow hoop she had shaved smooth and bent into a circle the width of her shoulders. Martha was 31, a neighboring homesteader whose husband worked lumber camps 3 months at a time, leaving her alone with 2 children and a better-built cabin than Birgit's, but not by much. Martha was practical, blunt, and not unkind. She also thought Birgit was losing her mind. "What are you doing?" Martha asked. "Measuring." "Measuring what? The rock?" "The opening." Birgit slid the hoop into the crack. It fit with 2 inches of clearance on each side. "If the hoop passes, I pass." Martha stared at the willow circle, then at Birgit, then at the cliff face. "You're planning to crawl inside the rock." "I'm planning to know what is inside the rock." "What is inside the rock is rock and dark, and maybe a drop that breaks your legs." Martha pulled her shawl tighter. "You should be chopping deadfall. You should be hauling brush for the cow. You're out here playing with holes in the ground while your woodpile shrinks." "The woodpile is the problem," Birgit said. "I cannot cut enough wood to keep the cabin above freezing through a bad winter. I do not have the tools or the time or the body for it. An armload burns in 4 hours. 4 hours. I would need to cut and haul every day from now until spring, and I would still run out by February." "Then you find someone to help you cut." "With what money? With what favor?" "John is dead, Martha. No one owes me labor." Martha did not have an answer for that. She looked at the crack again. "A body cannot eat stone," she said. "A body does not need to eat stone. A body needs to stop giving its heat away to the wind. The rock does not burn fuel. It does not crack in a gale. It does not need chinked walls or a stovepipe. It just sits there, holding whatever temperature it held yesterday." Martha shook her head. "You sound like your father." "My father lived to 63. Martha left. She did not say goodbye, and she did not say good luck. She said, "If Carrie needs a meal, send her to my place." Which was its own kind of answer. The mercantile in Hot Springs sat on a dirt street between a livery and a land office. Birgit went on a Thursday because Thursdays drew fewer people. She bought twine, tallow, 6 candles, a small hand mirror the size of a playing card, and a 3-inch file. She did not buy flour. She did not buy woodwrights. Alva Rusk noticed. Alva was 44 years old, thin as a fence post, and dressed better than anyone within 50 miles had reason to dress. He brokered land claims, buying improvements from settlers who could not hold on, and selling them to settlers who could. He made his living in the gap between desperation and ambition, and winter was his best season because winter was when people broke. He leaned against the counter and watched Birgit count coins. "String and candles," he said to the clerk, "and a mirror. That is an unusual winter order." The clerk, whose name was Dunning, said nothing. Dunning had survived long enough in Hot Springs to know when Alva was performing. "Mrs. Brecka." Alva turned the name over like he was tasting it. "I heard about John. A hard thing. A terrible thing." He paused long enough to seem sincere. "I also heard you are trying to hold the claim through winter." "I am holding the claim." Of course you are." Alva picked up the hand mirror from the counter and examined it as if checking for flaws. "I want you to know that my offer stands. $12 for the improvements. That is more than fair for a half-finished cabin and a leaking roof. $12, and you can take the girl to Rapid City, find work, start again somewhere that does not want to kill you." "The claim is not for sale." "Not today, I understand." He set the mirror down. "But January has a way of changing a person's arithmetic." He looked at the twine and candles spread across the counter. "May I ask what the string is for?" "You may not." A man near the stove, A freighter named Coulter, who hauled between Hot Springs and Custer, laughed and said he had heard the Brecka widow was digging holes in the cliff like a rabbit. Not digging, said another man. Measuring. She carries a hoop. A hoop? Coulter repeated. What does she measure with a hoop? Whether she fits through the cracks. The laughter spread. It was not vicious laughter, not yet. It was the laughter of men who thought they understood survival and could not imagine it looking like a woman with a willow circle pressing herself against a rock wall. Alva did not laugh. Alva smiled, which was worse. A woman cannot winter in a rabbit crack, he said. He said it to the room, not to Birgit. He said it the way a man says something he wants repeated. Birgit paid for her supplies. She folded the willow hoop. It was hinged with a strip of leather for exactly this purpose, and put it in her coat. She left without answering Alva, without looking at Coulter, without acknowledging any of them. Outside, the wind hit her face, and she stood still for a moment. $23 was now 14. The supplies in her arms were not food. They were preparations for a refuge that had not been tested, built on a theory she had learned from a dead father and a one-eyed stranger. She walked to the mare, tied the supplies behind the saddle, and rode 7 miles back to a cabin that would eat 3 armloads of wood before morning. Birgit and Tollef began testing the cliff in earnest. They worked before dawn because dawn was when the gossip slept, and the air was still enough to read a candle flame without guessing. They had mapped 3 points along the limestone rim. Tollef named them because naming things, he said, was how a miner kept from dying in the wrong hole. Crow Crack was the first. It breathed. The candle flame bent outward in steady pulses, but 20 inches in, the stone narrowed to a slot that would not pass a shoulder blade. Tollef tapped the walls and heard solid rock on both sides. Dead end dressed up as a door, he said. They marked it with a low cairn, 1 flat stone, 1 round, and moved on. Milkweed Split was the second. The name came from the dead milkweed stalks growing in the rubble at its base. The opening tilted downward at 45 degrees, wide enough to enter, dark enough to swallow the candlelight in 3 feet. Tollef went in first. Birgit held the string. He came back in less than a minute. His face was tight. Candle guttered, he said. Almost went out at the first turn. Wet rot on the walls, water pooling at the floor, bad air sitting in the low spots. He wiped his hands on his coat. Mark it. 3 crossed sticks. Never enter. Birgit drove 3 sticks into the frozen ground in front of Milkweed Split and tied the tops together with twine, a warning sign that needed no reading. Blue Ledge Fisher was the third. The name came from a stripe of blue-gray limestone that ran across the cliff face at chest height, forming a natural ledge just wide enough to rest a candle tin on. Below the ledge, the rock opened in a vertical crack, 15 inches at the narrowest, widening slightly above and below, but never more than 18 inches at any point Birgit could reach. The candle burned clean and steady at the entrance. No guttering, no lean toward death. The flame pointed outward with the quiet insistence of a breath that had been repeating since before anyone stood here to notice it. Tollef wet his finger, held it at the crack, closed his good eye. Pressure differential, he said. The air inside is warmer than the air outside, so it rises and pushes out through the crack. Consistent flow. That means the space behind this is not a pocket. It connects to something with volume. He knocked on the rock, low, then high. The sound changed. Higher up, the knock came back shorter, sharper, thinner rock. Lower, the knock was dull and heavy. The crack went deep. Birgit held her candle at the opening and leaned in as far as she could without entering. 10 feet of darkness. Then, nothing. The candlelight did not hit a back wall. It simply stopped reaching, swallowed by a space too large to illuminate from the entrance. That is either a room or a drop, Tollef said. We do not find out today. When? When I bring more string and a second candle, and when you have practiced the squeeze until your body knows the turn without your brain telling it. He made her practice on a wider crack first, then the narrow entrance itself, entering and retreating until the motion was automatic. Turn the hip. One arm high, one arm low. Exhale at the pinch. She scraped her ribs twice. Limestone was not forgiving. The rock took a strip of skin from her side on the third pass, and she bled through her shirt. Tolliff did not tell her to stop. He told her to sew a tighter overshirt from canvas so the fabric would not bunch and snag. Then he looked at her hands, the knuckles split, the nails packed with dust, and said, "You have the hands for this. Most people do not." It was the closest thing to approval he had given. Birgit did not thank him. She wiped the blood off the rock with her sleeve so it would not attract animals. If you have ever been dismissed by someone who could only see the old way of surviving, tell us about it in the comments. Carrie had begun watching. She did not follow Birgit to the cliff, but she noticed the limestone dust on her sister's clothes, the scratches on her forearms, the candle stubs that came back shorter every morning. One evening, she took her school slate and drew the cliff face from memory, 3 marks for 3 cracks, one with an X through it. "That is milkweed," Birgit said, pointing at the X. "Never go there." "I know," Carrie said. "It smells wrong." Birgit looked at her sister. 9 years old, drawing maps of places that might keep them alive, marking the ones that would not. This was what childhood looked like on a homestead with no father, no fuel, and a sister who crawled rock before dawn. Outside, the temperature dropped 3 degrees overnight. The north wall let the wind through in a low whistle that did not stop until morning. Birgit fed the stove. The stove ate. The woodpile was down to 1 1/4 cords, and December had not even started. Blue Ledge Fisher sat in the dark cliff face, breathing warm air into a world that was running out of heat. Birgit had measured the entrance. She had practiced the squeeze. She had tested the air and trusted the candle, but she had not been through. The 10 feet of sideways crawl ended in a blackness that swallowed light, and she did not know whether that blackness held a room or a fall or a dead end packed with bad air that the entrance flow could not reach. She would find out. She would have to. Because the woodpile was shrinking, the flour was thinning, and the winter had not yet shown its teeth. Tolliff came back 2 days later with 40 feet of string wound on a stick, 2 miner's candles thick as a thumb, and a tin cup he said was for listening. "You press the cup against the rock and put your ear to the bottom," he said. "If you hear dripping that echoes, the space is large. If you hear dripping that dies flat, the space is small. If you hear nothing, the rock is solid and the hole is lying to you." Birgit pressed the cup against the limestone beside Blue Ledge Fisher. She closed her eyes. Dripping. Slow. Irregular. Landing on something that gave back a long, ringing answer. The sound traveled before it stopped. That meant distance. That meant volume. "Room," Tolliff said. He did not say it with excitement. He said it the way a man says there is a river to cross, acknowledging the fact without celebrating the danger. They prepared for the first full entry. Tolliff tied string to a root that jutted from the rock above the entrance. He lit the first candle and handed it to Birgit. He lit the second and kept it. "You go first," he said. "I will follow as far as I fit. If the candle dies, you stop and come back toward my voice. If my candle dies, we are both coming out and we are not coming back today." He paused. "If both candles die, do not move. Wait. Count heartbeats. The air will cycle. It always does in limestone." Birgit turned sideways, one arm high holding the candle, one arm low trailing along the rock. She exhaled and pushed through the 15-inch pinch. The limestone pressed against her ribs like hands. She felt the scrape of stone through the canvas overshirt she had sewn from a feed sack. Then the pressure released. The crack widened to 20 inches, then more. She took 3 steps sideways, 4, 5. The string unspooled behind her. The candlelight hit a curve in the rock and reflected off something wet, a thin film of mineral deposit catching the flame. 6 steps. 7. Then the walls fell away. Birgit held the candle out at arm's length and saw nothing. Not a wall, not a ceiling close enough to touch, not a floor dropping out from under her. The candlelight reached into darkness, and the darkness simply continued. She stood still. Her breathing echoed back to her from at least two directions. The air was still, cool, and dry. It smelled like dust and old water and something mineral she had no word for. Tolif. His voice came from the squeeze, muffled by 10 feet of stone. Still here. Candle still burning. The walls are gone. How far? I cannot see them. A silence. Then, put the candle on the floor and step back 3 paces. Tell me what the flame does. She set the candle down on dry dust. The flame stood straight, not leaning, not guttering, not dying, just burning, steady as a lamp in a closed room. It is steady, she said. Then the air is good and there is no draft at the floor. You are in a chamber. Another pause. Come back. We know enough for today. Birgit did not want to come back. She wanted to walk forward into that darkness with its echoing drip and its still air and its impossible calm. But Tolif had taught her restraint before he taught her anything else, and restraint was the reason she was alive to stand here. She picked up the candle, followed the string, and squeezed back through the pinch. When she emerged into the cold daylight, her face was flushed and her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the size of what she had found. Over the next 2 weeks, Birgit and Tolif mapped the chamber in stages. Each visit went deeper. Each visit added string. Each visit confirmed what the first entry had promised. The chamber behind the squeeze was roughly 30 feet wide and at least 50 feet deep, Tolif estimated from the echo and from pacing, though in darkness, pacing was imprecise. The ceiling rose to 12 or 15 feet at its highest point. The floor was dry dust over limestone, level enough to walk on without stumbling. A slow drip fell from the ceiling near the far wall and collected in a shallow basin no bigger than a washbowl, then seeped into the rock below. The air smelled clean. The temperature did not change. Each visit, Birgit held her bare hand against the chamber wall and counted. The stone was cool, cooler than a warm room, warmer than any place outside. Tolif said the deep rock held close to the region's year-round average, which he guessed at the low 50s. Not comfortable in ordinary life. But in a blizzard that dropped the air outside below zero, 50-some degrees was the difference between living tissue and dead tissue. You will not be warm in here, Tolif said during their third visit. He was sitting on a flat rock near the entrance of the chamber, his one eye catching the candlelight. You will be cold. Your fingers will ache. Your breath will cloud. But your blood will not freeze. Your skin will not die. And you will not burn a single stick of wood. How long can a person stay? As long as the air holds and you have water. The drip gives you water. The air cycles through the entrance crack. The rock does the rest. He tapped the wall behind him. This limestone has been sitting at this temperature since before your grandfather was born. It does not care what the weather does. That is the secret. The rock does not give its heat away. He said that last line the way he said most things. Flat, factual, aimed at the information and not at the emotion. But Birgit heard her father in it. Stone keeps yesterday longer than wood. The same lesson, 2 men, 40 years, and an ocean apart. Birgit turned the chamber into a system, not a home, not even a shelter in the way people meant the word. A system, a set of preparations that made survival possible when everything else failed. She cached supplies at 3 points along the route. At the base of the cliff, under a flat stone that looked like every other flat stone, unless you knew to count 4 paces left from the blue ledge, she hid a tin containing 2 candles, a striker, and a square of oiled cloth. Inside the squeeze, wedged into a natural shelf where the crack widened for 6 inches before tightening again, she left a coil of string and a stub of tallow. Inside the chamber itself, on the flat rock near the entrance where Tolif liked to sit, she placed a second tin with 3 more candles, another striker, a small twist of dried beef, and a tin cup. She built cairns, low, deliberate stacks of 2 or 3 stones placed at intervals along the cliff face, leading from the nearest trail to Blue Ledge Fissure. Each cairn was small enough to survive casual notice, and specific enough to follow in reduced visibility. She gave them identifiers she could feel in the dark. The first had a notched top stone. The second had a round stone balanced on a flat one. The third had a stone with a crack down the center. Touch, not sight, because in a blizzard sight was the first thing to go. She marked Crow Crack with a single cairn, a waypoint only, not a shelter. She reinforced the 3 crossed sticks at Milkweed Split. She cleared loose scree from the approach to Blue Ledge so she would not twist an ankle in a blind run. Every improvement was small. Every improvement took time she did not have for other work. Each morning she chose between the cliff and the woodpile, and the woodpile lost more often than it should have. Aslak came back in mid-December. He did not come to help. He came because someone in town told him Birgit was still alive and still on the claim, and he could not square that with the math he had done in her cabin 3 weeks earlier. He found her dragging a dead pine limb across the frozen ground toward the cabin. Her hands were wrapped in rags. Kari was inside boiling turnips that a neighbor had left at the door without knocking. "You look worse than last time," Aslak said. "I am worse than last time." "How much wood?" "1 cord, maybe less." Aslak looked at the sky. It was the color of a dirty sheet, and it had been that color for 4 days. "There is a bad system coming. I have seen this sky before. When it breaks, it will not stop for 2 or 3 days." "When?" "Could be a week, could be tonight. That is the problem with the bad ones. They tell you they are coming, but they do not tell you when." He walked to the woodpile and stared at it the way a doctor stares at a wound he cannot fix. Less than a cord. The green wood was still too wet to burn well. The dry wood was disappearing. "Aslak," Birgit said. "Have you ever been inside a cave?" He turned. "What?" "A cave. Underground. In the limestone." "I know what a cave is. Why?" "Because I found one. A dry chamber behind a crack in the cliff. The temperature inside holds steady regardless of what happens outside. No wind. No snow. Enough air to breathe." Aslak stared at her. His face did something complicated, disbelief folding into irritation, folding into something that might have been concern. "You are telling me," he said slowly, "that your plan for surviving a blizzard is to crawl into a hole in the rock." "It is not a hole, it is a chamber, 30 feet wide, dry floor, clean air." "Through what kind of opening?" 15 inches. Aslak took his hat off and held it in both hands, which Birgit had noticed he did when he was trying very hard not to say something unkind. "Mrs. Brecke, you are a grown woman with a child depending on you. You cannot plan your survival around squeezing through a crack in a cliff in a blizzard. You will not find it. You will not fit. You will get stuck and freeze with your arms pinned, and that girl will be alone." Tollef's voice came from behind the cabin. He had been splitting what was left of the dry wood, and neither of them had heard him stop. "She found it 3 times in the dark with her eyes closed," Tollef said. "She fits. I watched her practice until the turn was faster than thinking, and a cabin with no fuel is just a box waiting to become a coffin." Aslak looked at Tollef. Tollef looked back with his one good eye and did not blink. "You are the miner," Aslak said. "I was a miner. Now I am an old man who knows what rock can do that wood cannot." Aslak put his hat back on. He looked at Birgit, then at the woodpile, then at the sky. "You are gambling your life on a crack in the earth," he said. "And hers." He nodded toward the cabin where Kari sat. "I'm gambling on the earth holding its temperature," Birgit said. "That is not a gamble. That is limestone." Aslak left. He did not say she was wrong. He did not say she was right. He said, "I will check on you after the storm," which meant he expected a storm, and he expected to find something afterward that needed checking on. The unexpected help came from Martha. She arrived on a Tuesday with a bundle of old feed sacks under her arm and a look on her face like someone delivering medicine she did not believe in. "These are for Kari," Martha said. "And for you. A torn dress catches on rock. A canvas wrap slides." She dropped the sacks on the table. "I am not saying your idea is good. I am saying that girl should not watch her sister crawl stone in rags." Birgit sewed a tight overskirt from the heaviest sack, double-layered, stitched close at the hips so nothing would bunch or snag in the squeeze. She sewed a canvas sleeve for her right arm, the one she kept low during the turn, because that arm took the worst scraping. She used the remaining fabric to wrap the candle tins so they would not rattle if she had to run. Martha watched her sew and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "How tight is it? The crack?" 15 inches at the narrowest, 10 feet of sideways passage. Then it opens. And after it opens? A room, big enough to stand in, big enough to wait. Martha picked up a scrap of canvas and turned it over in her hands. "If your stove dies and the wind is bad, how long before Carrie can reach my cabin?" 20 minutes if she runs, 30 if the snow is deep." "Send her to me," Martha said. "If it comes to that, send her to me and you go to your rock." It was not belief. It was not endorsement. It was a neighbor saying she would keep a child alive while the child's sister did something that might be brave or might be foolish, and Martha would sort out the difference afterward. Birgit found the cairn on a Thursday morning, and the wrongness of it stopped her mid-stride. The second marker, the one with the round stone balanced on the flat one, had been moved, not knocked over by wind or animal. Moved. The round stone now sat on the opposite side of the flat one, which meant the directional cue pointed south instead of east, and the flat stone with the red lichen that always faced the trail now faced the cliff. Someone had picked it up, turned it, and set it back down. Birgit crouched in the frozen dirt and stared at the stones. Her hands were shaking, but not from cold. She rebuilt the cairn. Then she walked the line, checking every marker. The first was untouched. The third was untouched. Only the second, the one closest to the trail where a person on horseback could reach without dismounting for long. Carrie noticed that evening. She had been copying the cairn map onto her slate, marking each stone with the identifier Birgit had taught her, and she said, "The lichen stone was wrong today." "I know," Birgit said. "I fixed it." "Who moved it?" Birgit did not answer, but she knew. The only person who benefited from Birgit dying on the wrong side of a cliff in a blizzard was the person who had offered $12 for her claim and smiled when she refused. She did not confront Alva. She did not tell Tolov. She went back to the cliff the next morning and built a second identifier into the cairn, a scratch on the underside of the flat stone, invisible unless you tipped it. If someone moved the stone again, the scratch would tell her. And she memorized the route by count: 14 paces from the trail fork to the first cairn, 22 paces from the first to the second, 19 from the second to the ledge, so that even if every cairn vanished, her feet would know the way. The fear she felt was not the fear of rock or cold or wind. It was the fear of a human hand reaching into the system she had built and twisting it. Weather was honest. Stone was honest. A man who moved a cairn in the dark was something else. Birgit completed the system in the last week of December. She ran a final controlled test with Tolov on a morning when the outside air sat at 9 degrees and the wind drove ice crystals horizontal across the ridge. She entered Blue Ledge without a lamp, feeling the approach by cairn and count, locating the entrance by the breath of warm air against her face. She lit the candle only after she reached the squeeze. The flame burned clean. She turned sideways, exhaled, pressed through the pinch. 4 seconds, no hesitation, and emerged into the chamber. Tolov followed as far as the first bend. He could not fit through the pinch. His shoulders were too wide, and his bad eye made him misjudge the turn in the dark. But he could hear her, and she could hear him, and that was enough. "Candle?" he called. "Burning." "Air?" "Clean, steady." "How do your hands feel?" Birgit held her bare hands out in the chamber air. The numbness from outside was already fading. Her fingers ached as blood returned to them, the deep, hot ache of tissue coming back to life. She looked at her hands in the candlelight. The nails were torn, the knuckles were split, but the skin was thawing. "They hurt," she said. "That means they are working." She left a tin cup just inside the fissure that night. By morning, the water inside had not frozen. Outside, the puddles wore an inch of ice. Tolliff estimated the chamber temperature at 54 or 55 degrees. He could not measure it precisely, but he knew what 54 felt like because he had spent 10 years underground in Wisconsin, where the deep rock held steady in that range, winter and summer, year after year. The same constancy that made mines survivable made this chamber survivable. The rock did not care about the calendar. "You are ready," Tolliff said. He said it simply, no ceremony, the way a man says a tool is sharp enough to use. "And if I'm not, then the rock will tell you. It always does." The warm spell came in the first week of January. The sky cleared. The wind dropped. The temperature climbed to the upper 20s, which felt almost tropical after weeks of single digits. People in hot springs opened doors. Children played outside. A man at the livery said winter was breaking early. Tolliff said the man was a fool. "This is not a break," Tolliff said. He was standing in Burgett's doorway, looking at a sky that was too blue and too still. "This is a breath. The storm takes a breath before it hits. I have seen this twice. Both times what followed was worse than anything that came before." Aslak said the same thing, differently. He rode past on his way to check cattle and stopped long enough to say, "The sky's wrong. When it looks like this and the barometer drops, a front is building somewhere north that will come down like a wall. Do not be on the road when it arrives." The warm spell lasted 3 days. On the second day, Carrie developed a cough. By the third morning, the cough had settled into her chest. She burned with a low fever. Her eyes were bright and glassy, and she asked for water every hour. Burgett had horehound root in a twist of paper, enough for 1 dose, maybe 2. She needed more. She needed lamp oil because the nights were 16 hours long and Kari was frightened of the dark when she was sick. She needed flour because the last sack was down to a fist-sized clump at the bottom. She needed to go to town, 7 miles each way. Tolliff told her not to go. "The sky will not hold," he said. "I can feel the pressure dropping. My bad eye aches when the pressure drops. It has been aching since last night." Alva appeared that same afternoon, as if the smell of desperation had carried to hot springs on the warm wind. He stood at the edge of the property and looked at the cabin with the calculation of a man pricing salvage. "Mrs. Brecka," he called. "I heard the girl is sick. A shame. Winter is hard on the young." He paused. "My offer has increased to $15. The improvements plus the cow. You could be in Rapid City by the end of the week." Burgett said, "I'm going to town for medicine. When I come back, the claim will still be mine." Alva tipped his hat. "If you come back," he said. He said it quietly enough that Burgett was not sure she was meant to hear. She left at dawn the next morning because Kari needed medicine, and waiting was no longer an option. She told Kari to go to Martha's cabin if the stove died. She told Martha that Kari might come. She saddled the mare, tied the flour sack behind the saddle, and rode toward Hot Springs with the sky overhead still blue and still wrong. The storm did not arrive as weather. It arrived as an ending. Burgett was 4 miles from home, riding south on the track that followed the creek toward the limestone ridge when the horizon disappeared, not gradually the way clouds build and darken, instantly. The northern sky went from pale blue to white to nothing in the time it took her to turn her head. Then the wind hit. It came from the northwest with a sound like canvas tearing, a ripping, continuous roar that flattened the grass and drove snow horizontal across the ground. The temperature dropped so fast that Burgett felt it in her teeth. The air went from the upper 20s to something that burned exposed skin in seconds. The mare stopped. She planted her hooves and refused to move. Her ears went flat and her nostrils flared, and she stood shaking with her head turned away from the wind. Burgett kicked her flanks. The mare took 3 steps and stopped again. Then a loose piece of canvas, torn from a freight cover somewhere upwind, or a scrap of tarp ripped from a fence, slapped across the trail like a gunshot. The mare bolted. Burgett had one hand on the reins and one hand on the saddle horn when the horse lunged sideways. She held for 2 strides. On the third, the mare twisted, and Burgett's grip broke. She went over the left side and hit the ground shoulder first in a drift that was already 6 inches deep and building. The flour sack tore on impact. White powder sprayed into the white wind and vanished. The mare ran. Birgit could hear the hooves for 3 seconds, then nothing. The sound was gone. The horse was gone. The flour was gone. She lay in the drift with the medicine bottle pressing against her ribs inside her bodice, where she had tucked it that morning because she did not trust the saddlebag. That bottle was the reason she was out here, Carrie's medicine. She pressed her hand against it to make sure the glass was intact. It was. She stood up. The world was white. Not white like snow falling, white like the air itself had turned to milk. She could not see the trail. She could not see the creek. She could not see the fence line that should have been 20 feet to her left. She could not see her own hand past the length of her arm. She was 4 miles from the cabin. The cabin had no fuel. Kari was with Martha or alone. The mare was gone. The flour was gone. She had medicine, the clothes on her body, and one mitten. The other mitten had come off when the mare threw her, and it was somewhere in the drift behind her. She stood in the whiteout and understood that she was going to die here unless she found the cliff. The cliff was east. The trail ran north-south. If she turned right and walked east, she would hit the limestone ridge within a mile. That was the theory. In practice, the wind was tearing at her from the northwest, and she could not tell east from the inside of her eyelids. Tolliff had taught her a rule for whiteout navigation. Do not trust your legs. The body walks in circles when it cannot see. Trust one fixed reference. For Birgit, the reference was the wind. If the storm was coming from the northwest, then the wind should strike her left cheek if she was walking east. Not her face, not her back, not her right side, her left cheek. She turned until the wind hit her left cheek and started walking. The snow was above her knees within 200 yards. Each step was a negotiation. Lift the foot clear, push forward, plant it, drag the other one free. The cold found the exposed hand immediately. Her bare right hand went from numb to aching to something past aching that she did not have a word for. She tucked it inside her coat, against her stomach, and used her mittened left hand to shield her face. She walked. She counted steps. The wind shifted twice, and each time she had to stop, turn, find the left cheek angle again, and restart the count. The snow drove into her eyes and froze her lashes together. She wiped them open with the mitten. They froze shut again. At 300 and some steps, she lost the exact count when she stumbled. She hit wire, a fence line. She grabbed it with her bare hand and felt the barbs cut through numb skin. She did not feel pain. She felt the wire, and that was enough. The fence ran east-west. She knew this fence. It marked the southern boundary of Aslak's grazing land, and it ran toward the ridge. She followed it hand over hand, the barbs tearing her palm in a line she would not see until tomorrow, the wind now hitting her full in the face because the fence had turned her north. No, not north. East. The wind was on her left cheek again. The fence was taking her east toward the cliff. She held on. She walked the wire for what felt like an hour, and was probably 15 minutes. The snow deepened. Her skirt froze stiff below the knee and cracked against her shins with each step. The cold was inside her now, not just on her skin, but in her muscles, in her lungs, in the spaces between her ribs where the air went in warm and came out as ice. Then the wire ended, a broken post. The fence stopped, and the whiteout continued, and she was standing with nothing in her hand and nothing in front of her, and nothing in any direction she could see. She almost walked in a circle. She felt her body wanting to turn, wanting to go back to the wire, wanting to follow the known thing instead of stepping into the unknown. But the wire went back. The cliff was ahead. Somewhere ahead. She let go of the broken post and walked. She found the rock with her body. She walked into it. The impact knocked her sideways, and she fell against the cliff face with her left shoulder pressed against limestone. The stone was cold. The stone was solid. The stone was real. She pressed both hands against the rock and sobbed once, hard, and then stopped because crying would freeze her eyelashes shut, and she needed her eyes. She was on the cliff, but she was not at Blue Ledge. The limestone ridge ran for half a mile along the southern edge of the hills, and she could be anywhere on it. She needed to move laterally, north or south along the face, until she found the breath. She went south first, hand on the rock, feeling the surface, counting steps. At 10 steps, she found a crack. She pulled her mitten off with her teeth and held her bare hand at the opening. Cold. Dead cold. No air moving. Not Blue Ledge. She went north. 20 steps. 30. Her feet were losing feeling, not numb, absent. She could not tell whether she was walking on the ground or on her ankles. The wind came around the face of the cliff in gusts that knocked her sideways and packed snow into the seams of her coat. At 41 steps, she found another crack. She pressed her face against it. The air was wet and had a rot smell. Milkweed split. She was north of Blue Ledge. She had passed it. She turned south and went back, counting now with a desperation that made each number feel like a held breath. 20 steps. 30. She slowed down. She pressed her hand against the rock every 2 paces, feeling for the fissure, feeling for the breath. If you are invested in this story, stay with us, because the next 60 seconds decide whether Birgit reaches shelter or becomes one more shape under the snow. At 37 steps, she felt it. Not warmth, not heat. Something less than that, and infinitely more. A current of air that was not the wind, moving outward from the rock with the patience of something that had been breathing since before the storm, before the winter, before the homestead, before any of them. Blue Ledge. The entrance had drifted half shut. Snow packed into the crack from the base up to a foot above the ground. Birgit dropped to her knees and dug. Her bare hand hit the snow, and she could not feel it. She dug with both hands, the mittened one pushing snow aside, the bare one clawing at the pack. Her nails bent back. One tore free. She kept digging. The opening appeared. 15 inches. She could see nothing inside. She could feel the air. She stripped off her coat. She could not fit through the squeeze with it on. The bulk would jam at the pinch, and she would be stuck half in and half out, with the wind at her back and the rock at her chest. She rolled the coat into a tube, tied the medicine bottle inside it with her scarf, and pushed the bundle through the opening ahead of her. Then she turned sideways, one arm high, one arm low. She exhaled. The rock pressed against her ribs. She felt it through the canvas overshirt Martha had given her the fabric for. The stone was cold and close, and it did not give. She pushed. Her hip caught on a shelf of rock that jutted inward. A piece she had cleared a dozen times in practice, but that the snow and the numbness and the shaking in her muscles made new and terrifying. She was stuck. The panic came up from her stomach like a wave. The rock was holding her. She could not go forward and she could not go back, and the wind was stripping heat from her legs, which were still outside, and the darkness ahead was absolute, and she was going to die pinned in a crack in the earth with medicine she could not deliver and a sister she could not reach. Tollef's voice, not his actual voice, the memory of it, as real as the rock against her ribs. Count heartbeats. If you feel the rock grab you, stop. Do not fight it. Count to 12. She stopped. She counted. 1. The wind screamed behind her. 2. Her bare hand pressed against stone that was warmer than the air outside. 3. 4. 5. Her breathing slowed. 6. 7. The panic receded from her chest to her stomach to somewhere below her awareness. 8. 9. She felt her ribs. She felt the rock. She found the space between them. 10. 11. She exhaled completely, emptied her lungs until there was nothing left, and felt her rib cage shrink by the inch that Tollef had promised. 12. She pushed. The hip cleared the shelf. The rock released her. She slid forward through the crack and fell onto dry dust. The chamber was dark, absolutely dark, the kind of dark that does not thin when your eyes adjust because there is no light to adjust to. Birgit lay on the floor and breathed. The air was cool and still, and it tasted like stone and age and water dripping somewhere far away. Her body shook, not from cold, from the aftershock of nearly dying, the muscles releasing tension they had held for an hour. She found her coat by feel. She found the medicine bottle inside it. The glass was intact. She put the coat on with fingers that would not close properly and lay on the dry dust and let the shaking finish. Then she found the candle tin. It was on the flat rock where she had cached it. 3 candles, a striker, a piece of dried beef the size of her thumb. She struck a flame. The tallow caught. The light was small and yellow, and it pushed back the darkness just far enough to show her the walls of the chamber, curving away on both sides like the inside of a cupped hand. The candle flame stood straight. No draft at the floor. Good air. Birgit held her bare hand out in the chamber air. Her fingers burned as blood returned to them, a deep, grinding pain that meant the tissue was alive, that the cold had not killed it, that the warmth of the rock was doing what the rock had always done. Keeping yesterday's temperature. Holding steady while the world outside destroyed itself. She drank meltwater from her skirt hem, wrung into the tin cup. She ate the dried beef in 3 bites. She wrapped her torn hand in a strip of cloth from the lining of her coat. She leaned against the chamber wall and felt the stone press against her back, solid, cool, indifferent, alive in a way that wood and air and fire were not. The rock did not burn. The rock did not crack. The rock did not blow away. Outside, the storm buried everything. For 3 days, the wind ran across the ridge, and the snow fell in quantities that turned the world into a single white surface. Cattle died standing in the draws. Fence lines vanished. The track between hot springs and the homesteads disappeared under 4 feet of drift. Aslak tried to ride toward Birgit's cabin on the second morning. He made it 1.5 miles before the wind drove him back. He reached Martha's place and found Carrie there, wrapped in blankets, still coughing, still alive. Martha had burned a chair and half a table to keep the stove going. Alva told the men at the mercantile that the Breaky widow had either run or died. He said it without visible pleasure. He said it the way a man mentions a debt coming due. Tolef, sick with a chest cold that had been building for weeks, sat in his dugout 4 miles north and listened to the wind. He could not search. He could not ride. He could barely stand. But he knew the wind was blowing outward from the ridge. He could feel the pressure in his bad eye socket, and a wind blowing outward from limestone meant the cave was breathing. And if the cave was breathing, there was a chance that Birgit was breathing with it. On the 3rd day, the storm broke. The wind dropped. The sky turned a blue so deep it looked like it was trying to apologize. Birgit squeezed back through the fissure into a world she almost did not recognize. The snow came up to her waist. The sun was blinding after 3 days of candlelight. Her hands were swollen and dark at the fingertips, and the torn nail had crusted with dried blood. Her lips were cracked. Her ribs were bruised where the rock had held her. She carried the medicine bottle against her chest and walked toward the cabin. Birgit reached the cabin before anyone from town found her. The door was open. Martha had left it unlatched after taking Carrie so the stove draft would not build pressure against the warped frame. Snow had drifted 2 feet inside. The stove was cold. The last of the furniture Martha had not burned, a stool, a shelf plank, sat dusted in white. Birgit did not stop. She pulled the door shut, crossed the yard, and walked the 1/4 mile to Martha's cabin through snow that came above her knees. The medicine bottle pressed against her ribs with every step. Martha opened the door and said nothing for 5 full seconds. She looked at Birgit's face, wind-burned, cracked at the lips, one eye swollen half shut from where the fence wire had whipped back, and then at her hands wrapped in bloody cloth, the fingertips dark and puffy. Then she stepped aside. Carrie was on a pallet near the stove. Her breathing was shallow and fast, and she burned when Birgit touched her forehead. Birgit unwrapped the medicine bottle. The glass was intact. The horehound syrup inside was cold, but liquid. She measured a dose with a spoon Martha handed her and tipped it into Kari's mouth. Kari swallowed. She opened her eyes and looked at her sister and said, "You smell like rock." Birgit sat on the floor beside the pallet and held Kari's hand and did not let go for an hour. Aslak arrived at Martha's cabin before noon. He had ridden out at first light expecting to find Birgit's claim empty and Birgit's body somewhere between the cabin and the road. He had brought a blanket for the body. He had not brought it consciously. He had packed it the way a man packs for the thing he does not want to say out loud. He found Birgit sitting at Martha's table with her hands wrapped in clean cloth and a cup of broth she had not touched. Kari was sleeping. Martha was boiling water for something she did not name. Aslak stood in the doorway and looked at Birgit the way a man looks at a horse that should be dead and is not. "Where?" he said. "The Fisher, Blue Ledge." 3 days. 3 days. No fire. No food except a piece of dried beef. Water from the drip and from snow I carried in my skirt. Aslak sat down. He did not ask permission. He pulled the chair out and sat and put both hands flat on the table and stared at them. "I told you Winter did not care how determined you were," he said. "You did. I did not know Stone could care less." He said it quietly. He said it the way a man speaks when a thing he has believed for 58 years turns out to be incomplete. Not wrong exactly, but missing a piece so large that the shape of the whole changes. He had survived winters with wood, with livestock, with neighbors, with stubbornness and preparation and the accumulated knowledge of decades. He had never once considered that the rock under his feet was holding a temperature that could save a life. "I want to see it," he said, "when my hands heal." "When your hands heal." He left the blanket. He did not explain why he had brought it. Martha folded it and put it on the shelf without comment. 10 days later, Birgit led Aslak and Martha to Blue Ledge Fisher. Tollef came too, though the walk cost him. His chest cold had deepened during the storm, and he moved slowly, stopping twice to lean against trees and breathe in a way that made Birgit watch him instead of the trail. He waved her off both times. The cliff face was scoured clean by the wind. The cairns had survived, the low ones, built tight and heavy, exactly as Birgit had designed them. The snow fence she had piled 20 paces from the entrance had done its work. The drift had formed beside the fissure, not over it. The entrance was clear. Aslak looked at the 15-inch crack and said nothing for a long time. "That," he said finally. "You went through that, in a blizzard, in the dark, with one mitten. I went through it in practice 12 times before I went through it in the storm. 12 times. Tollef made me practice until the turn was faster than thinking." Aslak looked at Tollef. Tollef leaned against the cliff and coughed into his sleeve and did not look up. Aslak removed his coat. He turned sideways. He pushed one shoulder into the crack and got 6 inches before he stopped. His chest was too broad. His hips caught at the first narrowing. He pulled back out and stood in the cold air breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the sudden visceral understanding of how tight the rock was and how much it would have taken to force through it with the wind at your back and no light and no certainty that anything waited on the other side. "I cannot fit," he said. "No," Birgit said. "You cannot." "Then who can?" "Anyone my size or smaller, most women, older children if they do not panic." She paused. "The rock decides, not the person." Martha went next. She was narrower than Aslak, and she got through the pinch with effort, exhaling the way Birgit had taught her, turning the hip before the shoulder. Birgit followed with a candle. They stood in the chamber together, 2 women in a room the size of a small barn, the candlelight reaching just far enough to show the curved walls and the dry floor and the basin where the drip collected. Martha put her hand on the wall. "It is warm," she said. She did not mean warm the way a stove was warm. She meant warm the way survival was warm. Warm enough. Warm enough to keep blood moving. Warm enough to keep fingers alive. Warm enough to wait out 3 days of a storm that killed cattle in the open and froze water in cabins and turned the world into a place where the air itself was trying to kill you. She found the candle stump from Birgit's 3 days inside. The wax had pooled on the flat rock and hardened into a shape like a small fist. Beside it, the string Birgit had tied off during her entrance, still knotted to a jut of rock, still leading back to the squeeze. And on the narrow wall of the pinch, a smear of something dark that Martha touched, and then pulled her hand away from. "That is blood," she said. "The rock took skin off my ribs going through," Birgit said, "and my hand was bleeding from the fence wire." Martha looked at the blood on the stone and then at Birgit. Her expression was not admiration. It was something older and harder than admiration. It was the look of a woman revising her understanding of what another woman could survive. "I told you a body cannot eat stone," Martha said. "You did." "I was asking the wrong question." They climbed back out into the light. Aslak was sitting on a rock near the entrance with his hat in his hands. Toluf was leaning against the cliff, his breathing audible from 10 feet away. "Well?" Aslak asked Martha. "It is real," Martha said. "It is cold, and it is dark, and it smells like the earth's cellar, and it would have kept me alive." Aslak put his hat on. He stood. He looked at the 15-inch crack and at Birgit and at the cairns marching along the cliff face like a sentence someone had written in stone. "What do you need?" he asked. "For what?" "To mark more of these. To teach people which cracks are safe and which will kill them. To build a system that does not depend on one woman knowing one hole." Birgit looked at him. The man who had told her she could not out-stubborn January was asking her how to build a network of emergency shelters along the limestone ridge. The conversion was not dramatic. It was not a speech. It was a practical man reaching the end of his doubt and arriving at the only question that mattered. What now? "Stone," Birgit said. "String, candles, and people willing to learn which cracks breathe." The community came slowly, the way communities do when the thing they need to believe contradicts the thing they have always known. A rancher named Parnell walked the ridge with Birgit and asked her to mark the safe points near his fence line. She showed him 2 breathing cracks, both too narrow for full entry, but wide enough to shelter a person's head and torso from the wind. Not caves. Wind breaks with thermal advantages. Parnell stacked cairns where she told him and asked no questions about the science. He had lost 2 calves in the storm and did not need theory. He needed options. A woman named Dunlap, whose husband drove freight, asked Birgit to teach her the candle test. Not for herself, for her 12-year-old son who rode between the homestead and the school alone. Birgit taught the boy in an afternoon. Hold the candle at the opening. Flame steady means safe. Flame guttering means leave. Flame dead means run. The teaching scenes reversed the earlier dynamics. Martha, who had once asked why Birgit was courting burial, now stood beside her at the cliff and challenged students the way she had once challenged Birgit. "What do you do if the candle goes out inside?" she would ask. And the student would answer or fail to answer, and Martha would look at Birgit the way a person looks at someone who has turned their own skepticism into a curriculum. Aslak hauled stone for cairns on a sledge behind his horse. He could not fit through the fissures, but he could build the markers that led to them. He stacked with the care of a man making amends through labor. Each stone chosen, each placement deliberate, each cairn visible from the last. Birgit shared freely. She did not charge for instruction. She did not claim ownership of the cracks. She told everyone the same rules Toluf had taught her: candle test, string rule, breath rule, dry dust rule, silence rule, 5 rules, no exceptions. She refused to teach anyone who wanted to skip the practice. One farmer asked if he could use fire inside a larger opening he had found. Birgit said no, not until the air had been tested for 3 days running, not until she had personally checked the draft. Fire in uncertain air could consume the oxygen a person needed to breathe or ignite gases pooled in low pockets. The farmer argued. Birgit did not bend. "The rock keeps you alive by not being the wind," she said. "If you bring fire into the rock, you're bringing the thing you are hiding from." Toluf died on a Tuesday in late February. The lung fever that had been building since the storm settled into him the way winter settles into a valley, slowly, completely, without any intention of leaving. He spent his last weeks in his dugout, wrapped in blankets, drinking broth that Birgit brought every other day on a walk she made regardless of weather. They talked during those visits, not about survival, not about rock or candles or string, about the things that fill a life when the urgent work is done. Tolliff told her about Wisconsin, about the lead mines where he had spent his 20s, the dark shafts, the tallow candles, the men who sang in the tunnels because the sound proved the air was still moving. He told her about the accident that took his eye, a charge that misfired, a flash of light, then a darkness on the left side that never lifted. He told her about the man who had talked him through the hours after the blast, lying in a collapsed drift with rubble on his legs, unable to see, unable to move, breathing only because the man beside him kept saying, "Slow, breathe slow, count with me." "That is why I taught you the heartbeat count," Tolliff said. "Not because I read it somewhere, because a man I never saw again kept me alive with it." "What was his name?" "I never learned it. The tunnel was dark. He spoke English, and I barely did. When they dug us out, he was already being carried to the wagon. I never found him." Birgit sat with that, a survival technique passed from a nameless man in a collapsed mine to a one-eyed prospector in a dugout to a Norwegian widow on a limestone ridge. Knowledge moved through people the way air moved through rock, finding the cracks, following the pressure, arriving where it was needed without anyone directing it. On his last morning, Tolliff gave Birgit his mind compass. It was a small brass instrument, dented and scratched, the glass cracked across the face. It did not point accurately anymore. It pointed approximately, which Tolliff said was good enough for any direction worth going. "Never let them make bravery out of carelessness," he said. He said it with his eyes closed. He said it the way a person says a sentence they have been saving for the right moment and the right person, and now both have arrived. Birgit held the compass and listened to Tolliff breathe. The breath slowed. The spaces between grew longer. The dugout smelled of tallow and damp wool and the particular stillness that fills a room when the air is about to belong to fewer people than it did a moment ago. She stayed until the breathing stopped. Then she closed the compass, put it in her coat, and walked home through snow that was already beginning to soften at the edges. Tolliff's chair in the dugout sat empty for a week before anyone came to collect his things. Birgit took the candle molds, the string spool, and a leather pouch of striking flints. She left everything else. The dugout itself she left open, the door propped wide, because Tolliff had never liked closed spaces above ground, and she imagined he would not want them now. Spring came the way it comes to the Black Hills, grudgingly, in fits, with setbacks that felt personal. A warm week melted the top layer of snow into mud. Then a cold snap refroze the mud into a surface that broke ankles. Then a second thaw turned the creaks into noise. Birgit repaired the cabin. She re-chinked the north wall with mud mixed with horsehair she begged from Aslak's stable. She replaced the roof seam. She rebuilt the woodpile slowly, cutting deadfall when the ground softened enough to drag logs. The cow had survived the winter on browse, and the hay Martha had shared from her own diminished supply. The cow was thin, but alive. Kari's cough had cleared. The claim was intact. Birgit had not abandoned it. She had not sold it. She had lived on it through the worst winter the territory had seen in a decade, and the law said that counted. Alva Rusk had not visited since the storm. He had not come to check on Birgit. He had not come to repeat his offer. His silence was not absence. It was calculation. A woman who survived a blizzard in a cave was a harder target than a woman freezing in a half-built cabin. Alva's leverage depended on desperation, and Birgit was no longer desperate in the way he needed her to be. But he was not finished. Word reached Birgit in March that Alva had been speaking to the land office about the marked refuge route. The route crossed a strip of land that Alva claimed to have purchased from a previous filing, a narrow corridor between the trail and the limestone ridge. If his claim held, anyone using the marked path to reach the shelters would be crossing Alva's land, and Alva could charge access, block the route, or simply refuse passage to anyone he chose. The community response was slow. Most people did not understand land disputes. Most people trusted that a trail they had walked for years would remain a trail. Birgit understood because she had grown up in a country where access to mountain paths was a matter of law and custom, and she recognized the shape of what Alva was building. Not a fence, but a toll. Not a wall, but a gate. She did not confront him. Not yet. She had learned from Tolef that the first response to a threat was measurement, not motion. She needed to understand the claim before she could challenge it. The secondary crisis came in April, during a squall that had no business arriving so late in the season. A school sleigh carrying 4 children and their teacher. A woman named Peck, who had been hired from Rapid City that winter and did not yet understand how fast the Black Hills weather could turn, left the schoolhouse at 2 in the afternoon under a sky that looked manageable. By 2:30, the sky was not manageable. A squall line dropped from the northwest, driving wet snow sideways and cutting visibility to a horse length. The sleigh was 3 miles from town and 2 miles from the nearest homestead. The horse stopped. The teacher, Peck, had no experience with plains blizzards and made the decision that killed people in open country. She left the sleigh to look for the road. Carrie was on that sleigh. She was 9 years old, and she had spent 3 months watching her sister measure cracks in limestone, memorize cairn lines, and practice survival systems that most adults in the district did not understand. She had drawn the cliff map on her school slate. She had marked the dangerous openings with an X. She had listened to Birgit explain the 5 rules so many times that she could recite them in her sleep. When Peck walked away from the sleigh into the snow, Carrie told the other children to stay under the blankets. Then she climbed onto the driver's seat and took the horse's reins. She did not try to find the road. She did not try to reach town. She turned the horse toward the ridge, not toward Blue Ledge, which was too far north and too narrow for a group, but toward a marked hay dugout that Birgit had added to the winter line 2 weeks earlier. The dugout was built into a hillside, faced south, and had a brush door that Birgit had reinforced with canvas. It was not a cave. It was not even a proper shelter by Aslak's standards. But it was marked, and Carrie knew where it was because she had helped Birgit stack the approach cairns. She found the first cairn by driving the horse slowly along the base of the ridge, leaning over the side of the sleigh and watching the ground. The snow was wet and heavy, but not yet deep enough to bury the low stones. She found the second cairn 20 paces later. She found the dugout entrance 30 paces after that. The 4 children and the horse fit inside. It was cramped and dark, and the air smelled like old hay and mouse droppings. Kari lit a candle from the tin Birgit had cached there. She checked the flame. It burned steady. They waited 2 hours. The squall passed. Peck, who had walked in a circle and ended up back at the empty sleigh, followed the horse tracks to the dugout and found all 4 children alive and dry, and one of them, the youngest, a boy of 6, asleep in the hay. Carrie did not explain what she had done. She did not cite the 5 rules. She folded the candle back into its tin, replaced it on the shelf, and climbed onto the sleigh for the ride home. When Birgit heard the story from Martha that evening, she sat at the table and put both hands flat on the wood and stared at them the way Aslak had stared at his hands in this same kitchen 6 weeks earlier. Her daughter, her sister, had not just survived. She had led. The knowledge had moved from her father to her, to Carrie, without any of them planning it. The system worked without Birgit inside it. That was the proof that mattered, not the cave, not the 3 days, not the frostbitten fingers or the blood on the pinch stone. The proof was a 9-year-old girl driving a sleigh toward a cairn she had helped build, finding a shelter she had helped mark, lighting a candle she had helped cache, and keeping 4 children alive because the knowledge was not locked inside one person's body. It had become a practice. It had become a thing the community carried. If this story reminds you why preparation matters, share it with someone who understands that survival is often built before anyone calls it courage. Alva heard about the school sleigh within a day. The story spread through Hot Springs the way stories do in small communities, Dasiwai, growing slightly with each telling, gaining details that may or may not have been there, but keeping its core intact. A child had saved 4 other children using the breaka system. The cairns worked, the caches worked, the method worked. Alva's response was not admiration. His response was the quiet, focused effort of a man whose business model was being dismantled by a dead miner's lessons and a widow's stubbornness. He filed a formal complaint with the land office, claiming that the marked refuge route constituted unauthorized improvement of his property. He argued that the cairns, the cache tins, and the brush markers were structures built without the landowner's permission. He requested that they be removed. The complaint arrived at Birgit's cabin in the form of a notice delivered by a clerk who looked embarrassed to be carrying it. Birgit read it at the table, folded it, and put it beside Toluf's compass. She did not panic. She did not despair. She thought about what Toluf would have said, and what Toluf would have said was, measure the problem before you fight it. Understand the claim, understand the land, understand the law, then act. The fight with Alva was not finished. The cairn stood along the ridge like a sentence someone had started and not yet completed, and the next words would determine whether the sentence ended in access or obstruction, in community or control. But that was tomorrow's work. Tonight, Birgit checked the door draft with a piece of wool thread, an old habit, Toluf's habit, the kind of habit that survives the person who taught it, and watched the thread lean slightly in the frame. The air was moving. The weather was shifting. Something was building in the north. She put another log in the stove and sat beside Carrie and waited for whatever came next. Birgit spent the first week of May learning the shape of Alva Rusk's land claim. She did not hire a lawyer because she could not afford one. She did not ask the land office for help because the land office had delivered Alva's complaint, and she did not trust that the same office would defend her against it. She did what Toluf had taught her to do with any problem that sat between her and survival. She measured it. The claim Alva cited covered a strip of land 40 rods wide, running along the eastern edge of the trail between hot springs and the homesteads north of town. He had purchased the filing from a man named Goss, who had started a claim in 1884 and abandoned it within a year. Alva's argument was simple. The cairns Birgit had placed along the ridge sat on his land. The cache tins were structures. The brush markers were improvements. He had the right to demand their removal. Birgit walked the strip. She paced it the way Toluf had paced the chamber, slowly, counting, looking for the thing the measurements would not say on their own. She found it at the northern end of Alva's claim. The strip ended 63 paces south of Blue Ledge Fissure. The fissure itself sat on unclaimed public land. The approach from the ridge trail crossed Alva's strip, but there was a second approach, a longer route from the north, that followed the base of the cliff on public ground, skirting Alva's boundary by a margin Birgit estimated at 30 yards. The route was harder. It added 10 minutes of walking in good weather and more in snow. But it was legal, and it was buildable. Birgit spent 3 days marking the northern approach. New cairns, new identifiers, new cache points. She did not touch the original route. She did not remove the old cairns. She left them standing on Alva's strip like a row of questions he would have to answer in public if he tore them down. Then she went to Aslak. "I need you to walk both routes," she said. "The old one across his land and the new one around it. Then I need you to tell people both exist." Aslak understood immediately. If the community knew there were 2 routes to the shelters, one shorter but contested, one longer but free, then Alva's legal claim became a nuisance rather than a barrier. He could block the old path. He could not block the new one. And every time someone took the longer route, every extra minute they walked in the cold, the community would know whose stubbornness had added that distance. "You are not fighting him," Aslak said. "You are going around him." "I am treating him like bad rock," Birgit said. "You do not drill through bad rock. You find the seam beside it." Aslak smiled. It was the first time Birgit had seen him smile since the storm, and it changed his face into something younger and more reckless than she had expected from a man of 58. He walked both routes that afternoon. By the end of the week, 6 families knew the northern approach. By the end of the month, the northern cairn line was better maintained than the original. Alva's complaint sat at the land office. The cairns on his strip sat undisturbed. Nobody used them. Nobody needed to. The system had routed around the obstruction the way water routes around a stone, not by force, but by finding the lower ground. The winter line grew through the summer and into the following autumn. What had begun as 3 points on a cliff, Crow Crack, Milkweed Split, Blue Ledge Fissure, expanded into a network that stretched 7 miles along the limestone ridge and connected to 4 homesteads, 2 hay dugouts, and the schoolhouse road. Birgit walked the line every October. She called it the winter walk, though it was more inspection than walking. Each shelter point was checked, candle tins opened, wax tested for mouse damage, string replaced if frayed, cairns restacked if frost heaved. Each dangerous opening was verified. Milkweed split still bore its 3 crossed sticks, and a second bad crack discovered in August, hot, a wet slot that produced carbon dioxide pooling near a mineral spring, received the same marking. She taught the walk to anyone willing to learn. The curriculum was simple, and she delivered it the same way every time, standing at the cliff face with a candle and a piece of string, demonstrating each rule with her hands while the students watched. First rule, the candle test. Hold the flame at the opening. Steady means safe. Guttering means caution. Dying means leave. Second rule, the string rule. Tie off before you turn. Darkness has no direction. Third rule, the breath rule. Exhale through the squeeze. Never inhale hard while the rock holds you. Fourth rule, the dry dust rule. Powdery dust means lower flood risk. Wet walls mean water has been here and will come again. Fifth rule, the silence rule. If panic comes, stop. Count heartbeats. Get to 12. Then move. 5 rules. Tollef's rules. Birgit never claimed them as her own. She said, "A miner taught me these," and let the students decide what to do with that information. Martha became the secondary instructor. She ran the practice sessions at the wider cracks where beginners could learn the sideways turn without the pressure of a real squeeze. She was harder on students than Birgit was. She failed people who rushed. She sent home a rancher who refused to tie his string because he said he could remember the way by feel. "Feel is what kills you when the candle goes out," Martha told him. He came back the next week with string. Aslak maintained the cairns. He treated the work the way he treated fence repair, a seasonal obligation that did not require discussion. He hauled stone when the frost broke them, restacked when cattle knocked them over, and added a new cairn at every point where the northern route crossed a drainage that might confuse a person in low visibility. He never spoke about why he did it. He never referenced the storm. He just appeared with stone and stacked until the line was whole again. Orrin Vale arrived in the district in September of 1887, hired to replace the teacher Peck, who had resigned after the squall incident and taken the stage back to Rapid City without saying goodbye to anyone. Orrin was 33, a widower from central Iowa, quiet in the way that some men are quiet because they have used up their loudness on grief and not yet rebuilt it. He had fine handwriting. He had calm hands. He had a way of listening to a person speak that made them feel they were being taken seriously, which is a quality that school teachers need and most school teachers lack. He met Birgit because the school needed a cold weather plan. After the sleigh incident, the district committee, such as it was, 3 men and Martha, required every teacher to know the winter line, the cairn routes, and the location of every marked shelter between the schoolhouse and the nearest homesteads. Orrin was told to learn the system. Birgit was told to teach him. Their first meeting was at the cliff face on a morning in early October. Birgit showed him the candle test. Orrin held the candle the way she told him to hold it and did not ask unnecessary questions. She showed him the entrance to Blue Ledge. He looked at the 15-inch crack and looked at Birgit and said, "You went through that." "Yes." "In a blizzard." "Yes." He did not say she was brave. He did not say she was remarkable. He said, "Show me the cairn line so I can teach the children where to go." They walked the line together that day and 3 more days that week. Orrin carried a notebook and drew each cairn from 2 angles, the approach and the departure, so the children could recognize them from either direction. He noted the identifiers: notched stone, round on flat, cracked down center. He asked Birgit to explain the northern route, and she did, and he drew that too, including the point where the route skirted Alva's strip. "Why does it go around?" he asked. "Because the direct route crosses land claimed by a man who would rather people not reach the shelters." Orrin looked at the map he had drawn. He looked at the extra distance. He looked at Birgit. That is a longer walk in a storm for a child, he said. Yes. Because one man filed a complaint. Yes. Oren said nothing else about it that day, but the following week he began teaching the children both routes, the old one and the new one, and he explained to them plainly and without editorializing why two routes existed. He let the children draw their own conclusions. 9-year-olds are capable of understanding spite when it is explained with a map and a measuring stick. The courtship, if it could be called that, happened through work. Oren copied route maps because his handwriting was clearer than Birgit's. He labeled candle tins with the shelter name and the date of last inspection. He repaired cairns alongside Aslak on weekends and did not complain about the weight of limestone. Birgit did not notice the courtship as courtship until Martha pointed it out. He copies your maps, Martha said. He has good handwriting. He repairs your cairns. Aslak asked him to help. He walks your route every week, even though school is only in session 4 days. Birgit looked at Martha. Martha looked back with the expression of a woman who had been married for 12 years and could identify courtship at a distance of 7 miles. He asked me, Oren said one evening, standing at the edge of the cliff where the northern route began, whether you wanted the maps kept under his name for town acceptance. Birgit had not heard this. What did you tell him? I told him I had not asked you, so I am asking. No, Birgit said. The maps carry my name or they carry nobody's name. I expected that answer, Oren said. He folded the map he was holding and put it in his coat. I will use your name. That was the courtship, not flowers, not declarations, not the theater of affection that novels required. A man who asked the right question, accepted the answer he was given, and continued working beside the woman who gave it. Birgit recognized the quality because Tollef had possessed it, the ability to see competence in another person and respond with respect rather than correction. Alva Rusk's resolution came that winter, and it came the way most resolutions come to men who profit from other people's vulnerability, not through argument, but through the world refusing to cooperate with their plans. A hired boy named Everett, 16 years old, worked in Alva's land office running papers between Hot Springs and the outlying claims. In December, Alva sent Everett to deliver a filing to a homesteader 12 miles north. The weather was cold, but clear. Alva did not check the sky because Alva did not check skies. He checked ledgers. The weather turned. Not a full blizzard, a ground storm, wind-driven snow that reduced visibility at ground level while the sky above remained deceptively blue. Everett lost the trail on the ridge. His horse turned into the wind and stopped. The boy dismounted and tried to lead the horse and walked directly into the draw below the limestone rim, the draw that ran along the base of the cliff within 100 yards of the marked route that Alva had tried to shut down. A rancher's son found the horse standing alone at the mouth of the draw and followed Everett's tracks to a point where the boy had sat down in the snow against a rock and stopped moving. His hands were white, his lips were blue. He was conscious but barely, and he had no idea where he was. The rancher's son knew the winter line. He had learned it from Birgit that autumn. He half-carried Everett to the nearest marked shelter, a wide crack in the ridge that was not a full cave, but offered wind protection and held temperature above freezing at its base. He lit the cached candle. He wrapped Everett in his own coat. He waited until the ground storm thinned and then walked Everett to the nearest homestead. Everett lost the tips of 2 fingers. He kept his hands and his feet and his life. The rancher's son, when asked how he knew where to go, said, Mrs. Brecka showed me. Alva heard the story the way the whole district heard it, through repetition, through retelling, through the accumulation of a fact that could not be argued away. His own boy, carrying his own papers, had been saved by the system he had tried to dismantle. The confrontation happened at Birgit's cabin. Alva rode out on a Saturday morning, which was unusual because Alva did not ride to homesteads. Homesteads came to him. He dismounted in the yard and stood with his hat in his hands, the same posture Aslak used when trying not to say something unkind, except on Alva, it looked like a man handling an object he had never held before. Birgit came out. Aslak was there because Aslak was restacking a cairn that frost had split. Martha was inside with Kari, mending string. "Mrs. Brecka," Alva said. "Mr. Rusk. The boy, Everett." "I heard." Alva turned the hat in his hands. He looked at the cliff behind the cabin, the limestone ridge where the cairns marched in their quiet line toward the shelters he had tried to seal behind a property claim. "I would like the marked route to remain open," he said. He said it the way a man says something that costs him, each word placed carefully, none of them coming naturally. "The marked route has always been open," Birgit said. "The northern route goes around your land." "I mean both routes." He paused. "I will withdraw the complaint." Birgit looked at him. She did not savor the moment. She did not force him to say more. She had learned from Tolef that the most dangerous thing you could do to a proud man was make him crawl, because a man who crawled today would find a way to bite tomorrow. "Both routes open," Birgit said. "No toll, no gate, no file in against the cairns." "Agreed." Aslak, standing behind a half-built cairn with a stone in each hand, said, "That is acknowledgement enough." Alva put his hat on. He mounted his horse. He rode away without looking back at the ridge, or the cairns, or the cabin where a woman he had called a rabbit lived with the system that had saved his boy. He did not become warm. He did not become generous. He became a man who had lost a fight with the landscape and knew it, and knowing it was enough. Birgit married Orrin Vale in the spring of 1888. The ceremony was held at the schoolhouse because the schoolhouse was the only building in the district large enough to hold the number of people who wanted to attend, which surprised Birgit and did not surprise Martha at all. Kari stood beside Birgit during the vows. She was 10 years old, and she wore a dress Martha had sewn from fabric that was not feed sack. She held Tolef's compass in her left hand because Birgit had asked her to hold it, and because some things should be present at beginnings, even if they belong to endings. Orrin moved into the cabin, which by then had 4 proper walls, a roof that did not leak, and a root cellar that John had started and Birgit had finished during the previous summer. The root cellar was dug into the same limestone that ran beneath the ridge, and its walls held the same steady temperature that the caves held, which pleased Birgit in a way she did not explain, and Orrin understood without being told. They had 2 children over the next 4 years, a boy named Peter, after Birgit's father, and a girl named Ragna, after no one in particular, saying Birgit had chosen the name because it sounded like it belonged to someone who would not be easily pushed. The winter line continued. Each October, Birgit and Orrin and Kari and whoever else volunteered walked the route, checked the shelters, replaced the candles, restacked the cairns. The practice spread not as legend but as chores. Replace the candle, check the string, rebuild the cairn after thaw. Test the air every autumn because caves change slowly, but they do change, and a passage that breathed clean in November might pool dead air by March if the water table shifted. Men who had laughed at the mercantile now sent their sons to carry stone for the cairn line. Women who had whispered about Kari being placed with a family in town now kept tallow tins dry in their own kitchens, ready for the walk. The transformation was not dramatic. It was the slow accumulation of a practice into a habit into a custom into the way things were done. Birgit did not seek credit. She did not name the shelters after herself. She did not allow anyone else to name them either. Blue Ledge remained Blue Ledge. The cave stayed unmarked on any map that left the district. Too much attention, she said, would bring people who did not know the 5 rules, and people who did not know the 5 rules would die in the rock, and the rock would be blamed. Tolef would have agreed. The rock did not need a reputation. The rock needed to be understood. Years compressed the way years do when the urgent work is finished and the daily work takes its place. Birgit proved the claim in 1891, 5 years after John's filing, receiving the patent that made the 160 acres legally hers. She stood at the land office window and signed the paper and walked outside and stood in the street for a moment, holding a document that said she owned a piece of ground she had nearly died on, nearly lost, nearly sold for $12 to a man who called her a rabbit. Carrie grew. She finished school under Orrin's teaching and took a teaching position herself in a town 40 miles east. She carried a copy of the cairn map in her trunk and taught her own students the candle test on the first day of every winter term, not because the terrain required it in her new district, but because the principle traveled. Know the ground, test the air, tie the string, count to 12. Petter learned the winter walk before he learned to read. Ragna learned it at the same time she learned to read, which she did early and aggressively, the way her name suggested she would. Birgit aged the way frontier women aged, early and completely, the years writing themselves into her hands and her face and the set of her shoulders. She walked the winter line into her 50s, then into her 60s, then stopped walking it because Orrin walked it for her, and she trusted his count. In old age, she kept Tollef's compass near the stove. The cracked glass had been replaced once by Orrin, who had found a watchmaker in Rapid City willing to fit a new crystal over the old brass case. The compass still did not point accurately. It still pointed approximately. Birgit said that was enough, that she checked the door draft with a piece of wool thread before every storm. She held the thread at the gap between the door and the frame and watched it lean. If the thread moved, the pressure was changing. If the pressure was changing, something was building. And if something was building, the rock would be breathing, and the candles would be ready, and the cairns would be standing in their quiet line along the ridge, waiting for whoever needed them next. By the second winter after the Great Storm, 7 families knew the marked refuge line. 3 safe shelters were maintained along the limestone ridge: Blue Ledge Fissure, the wide crack near Parnell's fence, and the hay dugout on the schoolhouse road. 2 dangerous openings were marked against entry with crossed sticks that the October walk replaced each year. The practice required no organization, no funding, no authority. It required candles, string, stone, and people willing to walk a line once a year and check that the earth still breathed. Birgit Brecke lived out her life on the claim she nearly lost. The cabin became a house. The house became a home. The root cellar held the same temperature in August and January, a fact that pleased her every time she descended the steps and pressed her hand against the wall. She died in 1923, in the same room where she had once counted frost on nail heads and listened to the wind testing a wall that no longer existed. Tollef's compass sat on the shelf beside the stove. The leather cord was dark with decades of handling. Kari took it home and set it on her own shelf, not as treasure, but as a tool that had finished its work. Outside, the Black Hills winter came the way it always came, the sky turning white, the wind stripping sound from the ridge, the snow driving horizontal across the limestone face until the cliff disappeared and the world became a single blank page with nothing written on it. Somewhere beneath the drift, a 15-inch crack breathed warm air into the cold, patient and steady, the way it had breathed when Birgit found it, and the way it would breathe long after everyone who knew her name had followed her into the ground. Alva Rusk had said it plainly in the Mercantile, while the men laughed and the stove ticked. A woman cannot winter in a rabbit crack. Birgit Brecke had answered with a torn coat pulled through the fissure, a candle flame standing upright in still air, and a medicine bottle unbroken in the dust. Outside, winter owned the world. Inside, the mountain had kept one small room for the living.